Hello everyone. I figure the best way to go about covering how a master budget is prepared with a little more detail is to do one in practice. So for this example, we are going to be Animal Gear Company, and we make two different types of pet carriers, the Cadillac and the Doggerific. I'm going to stick to exactly two to keep this relatively small. If you're a company that makes 20 products, yep, absolutely, you're going to need all 20 products listed on a ton of your budgets to figure out what things are going to cost. But if you can do it for two, you can do it for 20. It's the same steps, it's just bigger. So we're going to have two products, the Cadillac and the Doggerific, that only take two different types of material. They're made out of plastic with metal doors. The only difference between these two is the Cadillac is slightly smaller. We're going to need to compile a whole ton of information to make this master budget. And where we get that information from is the respective managers, people that work in our company. We would go to our purchasing manager to figure out what our input price is for plastic and metal, since he or she knows the best on what our expected cost is given the current market prices of those materials. We would go to HR to figure out what our expected labor cost is per hour for workers of the skill level we need to manufacture these pet carriers. We would go to the production supervisor to figure out what amount of inputs we need. And by that I mean the amount of materials that would need to go in, the amount of labor hours our workers are going to work, the amount of machine hours it's going to take to make a product. We would have information already, but we could consult our accounting staff about what level of inventory we have on hand, what value we're carrying it for, what amount of raw materials we have on hand, what we're carrying that for. We could do this for both our direct materials and for our finished goods. We need to do a little allocation in here. We got to get those overhead costs into these two different products, and we can choose to use so like Animal Gear does here with an ABC system. So they're going to have three different pools: setup, processing, and inspection. They're going to find the right respective people there that work in machining, etc., to know how long it takes to set up for a Cadillac versus how long it takes to set up for a Doggerific, how long it takes to go to the inspector and figure out how long it takes to properly inspect a batch of these products. Then we could go and check out our non-manufacturing costs, talk to all the people that work in administration that would know what kind of salaries we got to cover, any other fixed costs we have, what we're paying commission to our sales staff that pushes these Cadillacs and Doggerifics on pet stores. So we have all this information compiled here. We have all of the stuff that we need to start making our lower level budgets, and as is best practice, you should always start with your revenue budget. And the reason for that is we have a whole lot of cost budgets. And as you're going through this process, if you have a number in mind that this is the amount of revenue we're going to generate, it gives you something to compare an expected cost against. If you have a really big number for, say, direct material purchases that you're going to have to make during the period, is the revenue going to be there to support it? So this is the backbone of your master budget, because the revenue budget is something that you're going to have as a point of comparison for a ton of different cost budgets going forward. That's how you bring money in. We better know what that is before we can figure out how much money we have available to send out. So we're going to start with that revenue budget. And the revenue budget that we have is pretty simple. We have two different types of units. They each have their own respective selling price, because we wouldn't sell a dog carrier for the same price we sell a cat carrier for. They're much larger. So if we just take the number of units of each that we're proposing we're going to sell, our sales managers come through and say we think there's demand for this, multiply that by our expected selling price for each respective model, we get how much we're going to expect to record in total revenue. So if I go back to my information over here and I find our expected sales figure in this particular table, we see that we are expecting to sell 530 Cadillacs and 225 Doggerifics. So I'm going to start the revenue budget by bringing those numbers over. Our expected units sold for the Cadillac is 530. Grab that number off our info. Our expected sales for the Doggerific is 225. Bring that number on over. In total, we are expecting to move a grand whopping total of 755 pet carriers during the month of April 20XX. Well, what are we selling them for? We can go find it in our information. Our unit selling price for the Cadillac is $205, and for the Doggerific it's $310. Those are some expensive pet carriers. They must be fancy. But we can go and we can bring those numbers over to our revenue budget. So we're selling each Cadillac for $205. Let me go grab that number from my info. bring it on over. We're selling each Dogerific for $310. I'm going to go grab that from my info and bring it over. And then to figure out our total revenues, you just multiply. If we're selling 530 Cadillacs and we're selling them at an average price of $205 a piece, then we should generate $108,650 in revenues from the sales of the Cadillac model. For the Dogerific, if we sell 225 of those and we sell those at $310 a piece, we should generate a total of $69,750 worth of revenues from sales of our Dogerific model. And in total, if we add those two together, Animal Gear can expect to generate $178,400 worth of revenues during the period. Now we got to compare some expected costs against that. And to figure out what our expected costs are, we have to figure out what our expected production volume is, because that very much, all our costs are very much dependent on what we produce. So the next budget I'm going to do is our production budget. And on our production budget, what information do we have? Well, this is the standard formula. If you had for managerial, I call it the Pepsi formula, to figure out what amount you actually have to produce. Take what you expect to sell, add to it what you think you're going to have at the end of the period in terms of finished goods inventory, and that gives you how many you have to have in total for the period. But you don't have to make all of those, because you're going to have some already made, your beginning finished goods inventory. So what you're going to need to cover your sales and give yourself that buffer of ending units and finished goods inventory, what you're going to need, less what you already have, is what you have to produce. So for the Cadillac, our budgeted unit sales, we just had that information a minute ago, but I'll go grab it off the info one more time. We're proposing to sell 530 Cadillacs and 225 Dogerifics. So I'm going to go grab those numbers. It's always a good thing to have extra units on hand. A lot of things can happen. Demand can spike, like all of a sudden, for some reason, people, got lonely during a pandemic and decided they wanted to adopt a cat or a dog. Your sales jump up. Or you could have, distribution problems, or you could have problems getting your resources in, where you want to have those extra units around to continue to fulfill purchase orders from your clientele until you can get your production back in line. So you want to give yourself a little leeway in here. Don't make exactly what you expect to sell. You want to have a little bit extra. And what is that little bit extra? Well, Animal Gear is saying at the end of the period, they also want to have 30 Cadillacs that are finished in inventory and 10 Dogerifics. So let me go and bring those numbers on over to my budget. We've got 30 Cadillacs and we've got 10 Dogerifics. So if we're going to sell 530 Cadillacs and we want to have 30 remaining at period's end that are finished and ready to go, we're going to need 560 in total. If we want to sell 225 Dogerifics and we need 10 of those at the end of the period that are finished and ready to go, we're going to need a total of 235 Dogerifics at all points during this month of April 20XX. But we don't have to produce all of those, because we're probably, since we're not a new business, going to start with some finished goods inventory in our wares when this month of April starts. And according to our info on here, we are indeed starting the period with 10 Cadillacs in inventory that are finished and ready to go, 19 Dogerifics that are finished and ready to go. So let's bring those numbers on over. We've got 10 Cadillacs in ending finished goods. We've got 19 Dogerifics in ending finished goods, which means our units of finished goods inventory that we need to produce isn't the full 560. Since we already have 10 of those, we only need to make 550 Cadillacs. We don't need to make the full 235 Dogerifics that we're going to be required to have during the period, because we already have 19, so we only have to make the other 216 Dogerifics during the month of April 20XX.